I'd known for months that my wife Aurelia was slowly poisoning me for my life insurance money. But tonight, when she handed me that glass of wine laced with enough arsenic to kill a horse, I smiled, thanked her for being so thoughtful, and drank every last drop. Then I watched her face turn pale as I calmly poured myself a second glass from the same bottle, the bottle she'd been drinking from all evening. "Darling," I said, setting down my empty glass, "how long do you think it takes for arsenic poisoning to kick in?" That's when the panic set in. That's when she realized she'd been drinking her own poison for the past hour. And that's when she discovered that the man she thought was her naive, trusting husband had been playing a much deadlier game than she ever imagined. This is the story of how I fed my wife her own medicine, literally. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I had known for exactly 73 days that Aurelia was trying to kill me. Not in some dramatic crime of passion way, but slowly, methodically, with the patience of someone who had done their research. Small doses of arsenic mixed into my morning coffee, my evening tea, even the homemade soup she'd started making with such loving care. But when she walked into our kitchen that Tuesday evening, carrying 2 glasses of our favorite Bordeaux, I still accepted mine with a grateful smile. "You're so thoughtful, sweetheart. What's the occasion?" She settled onto the couch beside me, her own glass in hand, looking radiant in the soft lamplight of our Millbrook Heights home. "Do we need an occasion to enjoy good wine together? I just wanted to celebrate us." I raised my glass to hers. "To us then." The metallic taste was subtle. She'd gotten better at masking it over the past few months. I could feel her watching me as I took that first sip, then another. Her green eyes held a mixture of anticipation and what I might have once mistaken for affection. "Gideon," she said, reaching over to touch my hand, "do you ever think about the future? About what would happen if something happened to one of us?" I looked at her, this woman I'd been married to for 8 years, and felt something twist in my chest. Not from the poison, that would take longer to work. From the realization of how completely I'd failed to see who she really was. "Why would you ask something like that?" I said, taking another deliberate sip. She shrugged, a gesture that seemed casual, but felt practiced. "I just worry sometimes. Your job at Pinnacle Insurance is so stressful. You've been looking tired lately, pale. I noticed you've been having those headaches again." The headaches she'd been causing with her careful dosing. The fatigue that came from months of low-level arsenic exposure. The way my hands had started trembling slightly, something she'd pointed out with such concerned affection just last week. "You're right," I said, setting down my glass and reaching for hers. "I have been under a lot of stress. Here, let me top this off for you." I walked to the kitchen island, where she'd left the wine bottle, noting how she'd positioned it just so close enough to seem natural, far enough that I wouldn't accidentally drink from her portion. But what Aurelia didn't know was that I'd been watching her routine for weeks. I'd seen her pre-pour her own glass from a different bottle, one she kept hidden behind the flour canister. I'd watched her carefully measure the arsenic into mine. Tonight, however, I'd made a small adjustment to her system. "You know what I love about you, Aurelia?" I said, returning with her refilled glass. "You're always thinking ahead. Always planning for contingencies." She accepted the wine, her fingers brushing mine. "Someone has to be practical in this relationship. You're too trusting, too generous with people. It's sweet, but dangerous in this world. You think I'm naive? I think you see the best in everyone, even when they don't deserve it." She took a long sip, her eyes never leaving mine. "Even when they're taking advantage of you." I almost laughed at the irony. Almost. Instead, I drank more of my own poisoned wine and watched her face for any sign that she tasted what I'd tasted. That slight metallic edge that had become as familiar as her morning coffee routine. "Speaking of taking advantage," I said carefully, "I've been thinking about updating our life insurance policies. Maybe increasing the coverage." Her eyes lit up, just for a fraction of a second, but I caught it. "Really? That seems expensive." "Well, with my promotion to senior analyst, we can afford it. And you're right, my job is stressful. Better to be prepared, right?" Aurelia nodded eagerly, then caught herself, and tried to look appropriately somber. "I suppose that's wise. How much were you thinking?" "Maybe bump it up to 2 million. That way, if anything happens to me you'd be comfortable. You could travel, maybe pursue that art degree you always talked about." She reached over and squeezed my hand, and I saw genuine emotion there, though whether it was love for me, or love for the idea of $2 million. I couldn't say. Don't talk like that, she said. Nothing's going to happen to you. I won't let it. I finished my wine and set the glass down with deliberate care. You're probably right, I'm just being paranoid. I stood up, noting the slight tremor in my legs that had become more pronounced lately. I think I'll head to bed early. This wine is making me sleepy. As I walked toward the bedroom, I heard her voice behind me, softer now, almost tender. Sweet dreams, darling. I paused at the doorway and looked back at her. She was sitting there in the golden lamplight, already reaching for her phone, probably texting someone about how well the evening had gone, how trusting and naive her husband remained, even after all these months. Aurelia, I said, and something in my tone made her look up. Just so you know, I've always been a light sleeper. I notice things, patterns, changes in routine. She tilted her head, confusion flickering across her features. What do you mean? Nothing important, just thinking out loud. I smiled at her, the same trusting smile I'd worn for 73 days. Good night, sweetheart. As I lay in bed 20 minutes later, listening to her move around the kitchen, probably cleaning up, disposing of evidence, maybe even celebrating, I wondered if she'd noticed that I'd been the one to pour her second glass, if she'd tasted the same metallic edge in her wine that I'd been tasting in my coffee for months. I wondered how long it would take her to realize that the bottle she thought was clean had been sitting in the same cabinet as my morning coffee grounds. The same grounds she'd been so carefully doctoring every morning before I woke up. Most of all, I wondered what she'd do when she started feeling the symptoms she'd been watching for in me. The headaches, the nausea, the slow burn of poison working its way through her system. But I didn't have to wonder long. Within an hour, I heard her rushing to the bathroom. The retching started at exactly 11:47 p.m. I know because I was lying awake, waiting for it, watching the red digits on our bedroom clock. Aurelia had always been punctual, even in her body's response to toxins. I heard her stumbling down the hallway, trying to be quiet, probably still hoping I wouldn't wake up. The bathroom door closed with a soft click, followed by the unmistakable sounds of someone discovering what arsenic poisoning felt like from the inside. I gave it another 10 minutes before I got up, putting on my concerned husband act, and knocked gently on the door. Honey, are you okay in there? I'm fine, came her muffled voice, strained and breathless. Just something I ate, I think. Go back to bed. Are you sure? You sound terrible. The door opened, and she appeared, pale and sweating, gripping the doorframe for support. Really, I'm fine, probably just a stomach bug. But I could see the fear beginning to creep into her green eyes. The kind of fear that comes when your body starts betraying you in ways you don't understand. Let me drive you to Clearwater Memorial, I said, reaching for her arm. You look awful. She pulled away. No hospital. It's nothing that serious. She forced a weak smile. Besides, we can't afford an emergency room visit right now. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman planning to collect $2 million on my life insurance was worried about a few $100s in medical bills. I helped her back to bed, brought her water, played the role of the doting husband, with an accuracy that might have impressed her under different circumstances. But as I tucked the blanket around her trembling form, she grabbed my wrist. Gideon, she whispered, her voice hoarse, I need to tell you something. For a moment I thought she might confess everything. Part of me almost hoped she would. What is it, sweetheart? If anything happens to me, there's a key hidden behind the bathroom mirror. Safety deposit box at First National, box 347. Her grip tightened. Promise me you'll remember that. I promised, wondering what kind of insurance policy she might have taken out on herself, or what kind of evidence she was keeping locked away. By morning, she was worse. Much worse. The confident, calculating woman, who had been slowly murdering me for months, was now a shadow of herself, barely able to keep water down. But she still refused the hospital. I'll be fine, she insisted, though her hands shook as she said it. Just need rest. That's when her phone started ringing. The same number that had been calling her at odd hours for the past few months, the one she always stepped outside to answer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This time she was too weak to move quickly. The phone sat on the nightstand, buzzing insistently, and I could see the name on the screen. Cha, personal trainer. Want me to answer it? I offered innocently. No, the force of her response surprised us both. She lunged for the phone, nearly falling out of bed, and managed to swipe it just before it went to voicemail. Hey, she whispered into the phone, turning away from me. This isn't a good time. I pretended not to listen, but I caught fragments. No, something's wrong. I can't meet you today. Just give me some time. Tristan Shaw. I'd heard that name before, though it took me a moment to place it. He was the personal trainer at the Ashwood Fitness Center downtown. The one Aurelia had started seeing 3 months ago for private sessions that never seemed to improve her actual fitness level. After she hung up, I brought her more water and casually mentioned, "Was that your trainer? Maybe you should cancel your session this week." "Already did," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Shame, you've been working so hard with him. What's his name again?" "Thomas." "Tristan," she corrected automatically, then looked startled that she'd answered so quickly. "Right, Tristan. Nice guy. Very dedicated to his clients, from what I hear." Something flickered across her face. Guilt, fear, or maybe just the nausea that was clearly getting worse by the hour. "He's just a trainer, Gideon." "Of course, though I did run into Mrs. Chen at the grocery store last week. She mentioned seeing you and Tristan having coffee at that little place downtown. Ashwood Cafe, wasn't it?" Aurelia's face went from pale to green. "I think I'm going to be sick again." She rushed back to the bathroom, and this time I followed her. As she leaned over the toilet, I knelt beside her and held back her hair, just like a caring husband should. "Aurelia," I said softly, "is there anything you need to tell me? Anything at all?" She looked up at me, mascara streaked down her cheeks, and for a moment I saw something that might have been genuine regret. "I love you," she whispered. "I know," I said, and meant it. Even now, even knowing everything, part of me still loved the woman I thought she was. "I love you too." By noon, Tristan Shaw was at our front door. I answered it myself, noting how he seemed surprised to see me upright, and apparently healthy. He was everything I wasn't: tall, muscular, confident in the way that comes from never having to think too hard about anything. "Is Aurelia here?" he asked, trying to peer past me into the house. "She's not feeling well," I said. "Stomach bug." "Right." He shifted nervously. "Maybe I could just check on her. As her trainer, I mean. Sometimes exercise can help with nausea." I almost smiled at that. "I don't think exercise is what she needs right now, but I'll tell her you stopped by, Mr. Shaw." "Tristan Shaw." "Right, Tristan. She's mentioned you." The way his face changed told me everything I needed to know about the nature of their relationship. And the way he glanced at his phone, then back at me, told me he was expecting some kind of signal from her. "Actually," I said, stepping aside, "why don't you come in? I'm sure she'd appreciate the visit." As he walked into our living room, I noticed him scanning the space, like he was familiar with it. Like he'd been here before, when I wasn't around. "Can I get you something to drink?" I offered. "Wine?" "We opened a really nice bottle last night." "No thanks," he said quickly. "I don't drink." "Smart man. Alcohol can be poison if you're not careful with it." His eyes snapped to mine, and I saw the moment he realized I might know more than I was letting on. But before he could respond, Aurelia appeared in the doorway, looking like death itself. "Tristan," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "you shouldn't be here. Babe, you look terrible." "What happened?" The word babe hung in the air, between us like a confession. Aurelia's face went even paler when she realized what Tristan had just revealed. She glanced at me, expecting anger, accusation, maybe even violence. Instead, I simply nodded as if everything was perfectly normal. "I'll give you two some privacy," I said, heading toward the kitchen. "Tristan, you sure I can't get you anything? Coffee?" "No, really I'm fine," he said, but I could hear the confusion in his voice. He'd expected confrontation, drama, the righteous fury of a betrayed husband. Instead, he got politeness, and offers of refreshments. From the kitchen, I could hear them talking in urgent whispers. Aurelia was clearly trying to get him to leave, while he kept asking what was wrong, why she looked so sick. Their conversation grew more heated, though they tried to keep their voices down. "You need to go to the hospital," I heard him say. "No hospitals," she replied, firmly. "And no more visits. Not until this is over." "Until what's over?" A long pause, then "He doesn't know anything. Just stick to the plan." "The plan." Interesting choice of words. I returned to the living room, carrying a tray with tea and cookies, playing the oblivious host. I thought you might change your mind about the refreshments. Tristan was sitting on the edge of our couch, looking like he wanted to bolt. Aurelia had curled up in the armchair, clutching a throw pillow like armor. So Tristan, I said, settling into my own chair, how long have you been training my wife? About 3 months, he said, glancing nervously at Aurelia. And how often do you two meet? 3 times a week. Sometimes 4, I nodded thoughtfully. That's quite dedicated. Must be expensive. Aurelia spoke up quickly. It's worth the investment. Health is everything, right? Absolutely, I agreed. In fact, I just increased our life insurance policies yesterday. You can never be too careful about protecting the people you love. I watched both their faces carefully. Aurelia's showed a flicker of excitement, before she could hide it. Tristan just looked confused. Life insurance, he said. 2 million each, I said, casually. Though mine is a bit higher since I'm the primary breadwinner. Aurelia would be quite comfortable if anything happened to me. The look that passed between them was electric. Aurelia's eyes said shut up, while Tristan said how much. That's very responsible, Tristan said, though his voice had taken on a different quality. Your wife's a lucky woman. I think so too. She's been taking such good care of me lately. Special meals, drinks, constant attention to my health. I smiled at Aurelia, who was now gripping the pillow so tightly her knuckles were white. Though I have to say, you look worse than I feel right now, sweetheart. I told you, it's just a bug. Maybe Tristan could drive you to the doctor. I'd do it myself, but I'm feeling a bit lightheaded today. I really think she should see someone, Tristan said, studying Aurelia's pale, sweating face. This doesn't look like a normal stomach bug. Aurelia shot him a warning look. I'm fine. Both of you stop fussing. But she wasn't fine, and we all knew it. As the afternoon wore on, her condition continued to deteriorate. She couldn't keep food down, her hands shook constantly, and I noticed her checking her pulse obsessively, when she thought no one was looking. Around 4 o'clock, she finally asked Tristan to drive her somewhere. Not to the hospital, to the bank. I need to access my safety deposit box, she told him. Some important documents. I offered to come along, but she insisted I stay home and rest. You look pale too, she said. Maybe we both caught something. After they left, I went straight to the bathroom mirror she'd mentioned. Sure enough, taped to the back was a small key, but I didn't need it. I already knew what was in box 347. While they were gone, my phone rang. It was Dr. Patricia Vance from Clearwater Memorial's toxicology department, returning a call I'd made 3 days earlier. Mr. Stone, you asked me to call with the results of those blood samples. Yes, doctor. What did you find? Significant levels of arsenic trioxide. Chronic exposure over several months, I'd estimate. The levels are concerning, but not immediately life-threatening. If the exposure stops, however, Mr. Stone, I have to ask, how did you come to suspect arsenic poisoning? Let's just say I've been paying attention to patterns. Doctor, hypothetically, if someone had been consuming similar levels of arsenic over a shorter period, say, a single large dose, what would be the timeline for symptoms? Acute arsenic poisoning. Symptoms would begin within hours. Nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, followed by more severe complications if untreated. And is it treatable? Absolutely, if caught early. We have specific antidotes and supportive care protocols. I thanked her, and hung up just as I heard Tristan's car pulling into the driveway. They both looked worse when they returned. Aurelia was leaning heavily on Tristan's arm, barely able to walk on her own. But there was something different in their demeanor, a grim satisfaction that told me their bank visit had gone exactly as planned. How are you feeling, sweetheart? I asked, as they settled back into the living room. Better, she lied. Much better. But Tristan couldn't hide his excitement as well as she could. He kept glancing at her with a look that was part concern, part anticipation, like someone who had just learned he was about to inherit a fortune. Did you get your documents sorted out? I asked innocently. Yes, Aurelia said. Everything's in order now. Good. I worry about these things being properly arranged. You never know what might happen. As evening approached, Aurelia's condition worsened again. But now Tristan seemed less concerned about her immediate health, and more focused on something else entirely. I caught him looking at his phone repeatedly, typing quick messages to someone. Around 8 o'clock, as Aurelia dozed fitfully on the couch, Tristan pulled me aside. "Look, I don't know you very well," he said, "but I care about your wife. She's been under a lot of stress lately." "What kind of stress?" "Work stuff, financial pressures. She's worried about your health too. Says you've been having episodes." "Episodes." Interesting word choice. "Has she?" I said. "What kind of episodes?" "Dizzy spells, headaches. She's been researching your symptoms online, trying to figure out what might be wrong." I bet she had been. "She loves you very much," Tristan continued. "She's just scared something might happen to you." The sincerity in his voice was almost touching. He actually believed he was comforting a worried husband, not talking to the target of an elaborate murder plot. "That's very kind of you to say. She's lucky to have such a caring trainer." "We've become close," he admitted. "Sometimes when people are going through tough times, they need someone to talk to. I'm sure she appreciates having someone who understands her." As the evening progressed, I watched them both carefully. Aurelia, fighting waves of nausea, and barely conscious. Tristan, constantly checking his phone, and growing more animated despite trying to hide it. Finally, around 10 o'clock, Aurelia asked me to help her to bed. "I think I'm getting better," she whispered as I tucked her in. "Should be fine by tomorrow." "I hope so," I said. "Though you might want to avoid wine for a while. Sometimes alcohol can make stomach bugs worse." She looked at me sharply, and for a moment I thought she might ask how I knew about the wine being the problem. But then another wave of nausea hit her, and she just nodded weakly. After she fell asleep, I found Tristan in the living room, now openly texting on his phone with a satisfied smile on his face. "Good news?" I asked. He looked up, startled, then quickly put the phone away. "Just work stuff. Scheduling appointments for next week. Must be nice to have such a flexible schedule. All those private sessions with clients. Yeah, it's a good business. Personal attention, you know. People pay well for someone who really focuses on their specific needs." I nodded thoughtfully. "I imagine they do, especially when those needs are quite specialized." Something in my tone made him look at me more carefully. But before he could respond, we both heard Aurelia calling weakly from the bedroom. She was sick again. As I went to help her, I caught Tristan on his phone once more. This time, I heard part of what he was saying. "Tomorrow should be the day, maybe sooner if she keeps getting worse." When I returned to the living room, he was already gathering his things to leave. "Take care of her," he said at the door. "And if anything happens, anything at all, call me immediately." After he left, I sat in the quiet house, listening to Aurelia's labored breathing from the bedroom. Everything was proceeding exactly as I'd planned. Tomorrow, they would both discover just how carefully I'd been paying attention to their specialized needs. By morning, Aurelia was desperate enough to finally agree to see a doctor. But not at Clearwater Memorial. She insisted on driving across town to Westfield General, where she claimed her medical records wouldn't be cluttered with unnecessary information. I found that choice interesting, especially since I knew she'd been researching arsenic poisoning symptoms for months, carefully documenting what to expect and when. She didn't want her regular doctors to see patterns that might raise questions later. Tristan arrived early to drive her, looking more nervous than concerned. As they prepared to leave, I made one final offer. "Are you sure you don't want me to come along? I could drive myself, meet you there." "No," Aurelia said quickly, then softened her tone. "You look tired too, darling. Rest up. I'll call you as soon as I know anything." After they left, I made a phone call I'd been planning for weeks. "Detective Morrison, this is Gideon Stone. I believe it's time we had that conversation." Within an hour, Detective Sarah Morrison was sitting in my living room, reviewing the evidence I'd been carefully collecting for the past 3 months. Medical records, bank statements, recorded conversations, and most importantly, the contents of safety deposit box 347. "Mr. Stone," she said, looking up from the documents, "how long have you known about this?" "Officially, since yesterday, when I confirmed the final piece of the puzzle." Unofficially, I started suspecting something was wrong about 4 months ago, when my coffee started tasting different, and you didn't report it immediately, because I needed to understand the full scope of what they were planning. Aurelia isn't working alone, and Tristan Shaw isn't just her lover. He's done this before. Detective Morrison raised an eyebrow. Explain. I handed her a thick folder. 3 other women in the past 5 years, all married to men with substantial life insurance policies. All started working with Tristan as their personal trainer. All became widows within 6 months of starting their fitness journey. She flipped through the pages, her expression growing darker with each new revelation. Jessica Martinez, in Phoenix. Linda Chen in Denver. Rebecca Hayes in Portland. All ruled natural deaths or accidents. All had arsenic in their systems when they died, though the levels were attributed to environmental factors or old pesticide exposure. All had recently increased their husbands' life insurance policies, and all had been having affairs with personal trainers who disappeared shortly after collecting their fees. Tristan Shaw, different names, same MO. He's been using variations. Tyler Sharp, Thomas Sterling, Trevor Stone, always keeps the same initials, probably to avoid confusion with fake documents. Detective Morrison was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Why didn't any of the previous investigations uncover this pattern? Because he's smart. Different states, different methods, always just enough variation to avoid detection. And the women were always careful to look like grieving widows who happened to find comfort with their fitness trainers during their time of loss. But you figured it out. I nodded. Because I work in insurance, and I know how to spot patterns that others might miss. When Aurelia suddenly became interested in fitness, and started talking about updating our policies, I ran some cross-reference searches through our database. What about last night? You said Aurelia was poisoned by the same arsenic she's been using on me. Yes. I switched our wine glasses. She's been so focused on poisoning me that she never considered someone might turn the tables. Detective Morrison looked concerned. Mr. Stone, that's technically self-defense. I interrupted, and I've been working with Dr. Vance at Clearwater Memorial's toxicology department to monitor both our conditions. Aurelia received a much larger dose than I ever did, but it's not fatal if treated promptly, which is why she's at the hospital now. Exactly. Though I suspect she's about to receive some very unpleasant news about more than just her medical condition. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and smiled. Speaking of which, they've just arrived at Westfield General, the same hospital where Tristan's last victim, Rebecca Hayes, was treated for sudden illness before dying mysteriously at home 3 days later. Detective Morrison stood up. We need to get there, now. Detective, there's one more thing you need to know. I handed her a final document. Yesterday, when they went to the bank, Aurelia wasn't just accessing her safety deposit box. She was signing papers to transfer all our joint assets into Tristan's name, including the life insurance beneficiary forms. What? She thinks she's securing their future together. What she doesn't realize is that Tristan has been planning to eliminate her as soon as I'm dead. She's not his partner. She's his next victim. At Westfield General, we found chaos. Aurelia had collapsed in the waiting room, and Tristan was demanding immediate treatment, while simultaneously trying to avoid giving the medical staff any useful information about her symptoms. Dr. Patricia Van, who had driven over from Clearwater Memorial at my request, was arguing with the attending physician about proper treatment protocols for arsenic poisoning. The patient needs immediate chelation therapy, Dr. Vance was saying. These symptoms are consistent with acute arsenic toxicity. How can you be certain? The other doctor asked. Because I've been treating her husband for chronic arsenic exposure for the past week. That's when Tristan finally understood what was happening. His face went white as he realized that not only had his perfect murder plan been exposed, but that Aurelia, his supposed partner, had been actively poisoning herself while trying to kill me. He tried to leave then, claiming he needed to move his car, but Detective Morrison was waiting for him in the parking lot with backup officers. Inside, as Dr. Vance worked to stabilize Aurelia, she kept asking for Tristan, not understanding why he hadn't come back.
When Detective Morrison finally told her he'd been arrested, her first response wasn't concern for her lover. It was panic about the money. "The insurance policies," she whispered. "Are they still valid?"
"Mrs. Stone," Detective Morrison said gently, "your husband is very much alive, and thanks to his cooperation, we now understand the full extent of what you and Mr. Shaw were planning." That's when the crushing reality finally hit her. She hadn't been the mastermind of an elaborate murder scheme. She'd been the pawn in someone else's game. Tristan had seduced her, manipulated her, and planned to kill her as soon as she'd served her purpose. But even worse than being betrayed by Tristan was the realization that I had known everything from the beginning, that every conversation, every tender moment, every carefully planned step of her murder plot had been observed, documented, and ultimately used against her. "How long?" she asked me when I came to see her in her hospital room later that evening. How long did I know? I sat down in the chair beside her bed. "About the arsenic, about 4 months. About Tristan, about 3 months. About your plan to kill me and frame it as illness." I paused, looking at this woman I'd once loved completely. "I knew the moment you suggested we increase our life insurance policies." 3 days later, as Aurelia recovered in her hospital bed under police guard, Detective Morrison came to my house with questions that had been bothering her since our first conversation. "Mr. Stone, I need to understand something. You've been systematically documenting evidence against your wife and her accomplice for months. You've been working with toxicologists, running insurance database searches, even coordinating with law enforcement across multiple states. This level of planning suggests you knew exactly what was going to happen." I poured her a cup of coffee, regular coffee, nothing added, and sat down across from her in my living room. "Detective, do you know what I do for a living? You're a senior analyst at Pinnacle Insurance. Specifically, I investigate suspicious death claims. I look for patterns that suggest fraud, murder, or elaborate schemes designed to circumvent policy terms." I leaned back in my chair. "When your own wife starts exhibiting every red flag you've been trained to recognize, you pay attention." Detective Morrison pulled out her notebook. "Walk me through it." 4 months ago, Aurelia suddenly became interested in fitness. Not unusual by itself, but she specifically chose Ashwood Fitness Center, the most expensive gym in the city, and requested private training sessions. When I ran a background check on Tristan Shaw through our insurance database, I found something interesting. The other victims. The pattern was subtle but consistent. Personal trainers with similar names, similar methods, always targeting married women whose husbands had recently increased their life insurance policies. I pulled out a thick binder from my desk drawer. I didn't just collect evidence on Tristan and Aurelia. I built cases on all his previous crimes. Detective Morrison flipped through pages of meticulously organized documentation. Financial records, travel patterns, identity changes, medical reports from previous victims. "How did you get access to all this?" "I have contacts in insurance companies across the country. When you tell people you're investigating a potential serial killer who's defrauding life insurance policies, they become very cooperative." I turned to a specific page. 3 weeks ago, I contacted the families of Tristan's previous victims. They've been waiting years for someone to connect these dots. And the arsenic poisoning. I started collecting samples of everything Aurelia gave me the moment I suspected something was wrong. Dr. Vance wasn't just treating me for poisoning. She was helping me document the progressive exposure levels to build a timeline of premeditated attempted murder. Detective Morrison looked up from the files. "But you let it continue. You kept drinking the poisoned coffee, eating the contaminated food. Why?" "Because I needed them to believe they were succeeding. If I had confronted Aurelia or changed my routine, she would have gotten suspicious. Tristan would have disappeared like he did in Phoenix, Denver, and Portland. They would have moved on to their next victims. So you poisoned her back." I gave her a taste of her own medicine to accelerate her timeline and force them into making mistakes. The wine switch wasn't revenge, detective. It was strategy. I needed her sick enough to seek medical attention, because that would create the medical documentation we needed for prosecution. She closed the binder and studied my face. "Mr. Stone, you orchestrated an elaborate sting operation using yourself as bait. You could have been killed." Dr. Vance was monitoring my blood levels weekly. We knew exactly how much arsenic I could safely tolerate, and I was taking chelation supplements to minimize the long-term effects. I smiled grimly. Besides, the alternative was letting them murder me successfully, and then move on to destroy other families. The safety deposit box. I accessed it 3 weeks ago with a court order based on suspicious activity patterns. Aurelia had been storing detailed plans, including research on arsenic dosing, insurance policy documentation, and even a timeline for my expected death. I handed her another folder. She also had forged documents prepared to transfer all our assets to Tristan immediately after my funeral. Detective Morrison shook her head in amazement. You've been building multiple criminal cases simultaneously, while pretending to be a clueless victim. The best way to catch predators is to let them think they're hunting you while you're actually hunting them. As she prepared to leave, Detective Morrison paused at the door. One more question. Did you ever love her? Really love her? I looked out the window toward Clearwater Memorial, where Aurelia was facing charges for attempted murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. I loved the woman I thought she was, but that woman never existed. 6 months later, I sat in the courthouse as the judge read the verdicts. Tristan Shaw was sentenced to life without parole for 4 counts of first-degree murder and multiple counts of fraud. Aurelia received 25 years for attempted murder and conspiracy. As the families of Tristan's previous victims hugged each other in the hallway, finally having justice for their lost loved ones, Detective Morrison approached me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "There's something that's been bothering me, Mr. Stone," she said quietly. "I've been reviewing the timeline of your investigation, and something doesn't add up." I wasn't surprised she'd figured it out. Detective Morrison was thorough. "What doesn't add up?" "You contacted Dr. Vance about setting up toxicology monitoring 3 days before Aurelia ever gave you the first poison coffee. You accessed the insurance database to search for patterns related to Tristan Shaw a full week before your wife even met him." She paused, studying my face. "You didn't discover their plot, Gideon. You orchestrated it." I nodded slowly. "You're right. How?" "I've been tracking Tristan Shaw for 2 years, ever since the Rebecca Hayes case caught my attention during a routine insurance review. I knew he was hunting for his next victim, and I knew his pattern. He targeted wives of men with substantial life insurance policies who seemed vulnerable to manipulation." Detective Morrison's eyes widened. "You set up your own wife." "I made myself the perfect target. I increased our insurance policies, made sure Aurelia knew about our financial vulnerability, even suggested she start working out to reduce stress. I researched which gym Tristan was likely to target next, and convinced her to join Ashwood Fitness. You manipulated her into meeting a serial killer. I gave her the opportunity to make a choice. She chose to conspire to murder her husband for money." I looked toward the courtroom, where Aurelia was being led away in handcuffs. "No one forced her to put arsenic in my coffee, Detective. But you knew she would." "I suspected she might. The alternative was letting Tristan find another victim, maybe someone who wouldn't have the resources or knowledge to stop him." Detective Morrison was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "Do you feel any guilt about what you did to her?" "Every day," I admitted. "But I feel more guilt about what would have happened to his next victims if I hadn't stopped him. And if Aurelia had chosen differently, if she had refused to participate in his scheme, then I would have found another way to catch him, and Aurelia would be going home to a husband who loved her instead of sitting in a prison cell." The courthouse was emptying now, families and reporters filing out into the afternoon sun. In a few hours, this would be tomorrow's headlines. Insurance investigators' elaborate sting catches serial killer. But they would never report the real story. How a man had to destroy his marriage to save the lives of strangers. How sometimes the only way to catch a monster is to become something monstrous yourself. As I walked to my car, I thought about the question that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Was I a hero who saved innocent lives, or a manipulator who destroyed the woman I once loved? Maybe I was both. Maybe that's what justice really costs. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.